On today's episode of Attention ALVA, we'll be talking about the efforts to create a new National Museum of the American Latino in Washington, D.C. Stay tuned. You won't want to miss this episode. Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to Attention ALVA, the podcast for the American Latino Veterans Association. We are so excited to have you join us for this very special episode. I'm your host, Danny Vargas, Chairman and CEO of ALVA. In addition to these podcasts where you get to hear from inspiring guests, we also have a webinar series where you'll learn great information on really important topics. And keep an eye out for future events by visiting our website, alvavets.org, and our social media channels at AlvaVets. We really want to thank our sponsors for these podcasts and webinars: JPMorganChase, PMI, Wells Fargo, AT&T, T-Mobile, and Accenture. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe. It really helps us out very much if you can do those things for us. I'm very pleased to introduce our special guests for today, Lili Valletta and Estuardo Rodriguez. I'll introduce you both. Hi, guys. Thanks for coming.
Hello.
All right, ladies first. We'll start with Lili. Lili Valletta is a former corporate executive turned award-winning entrepreneur, television business contributor, and TED speaker. After a 10-year tenure as an executive at Johnson & Johnson, she's a co-founder and CEO of Culture Plus Group, a family of cultural intelligence companies offering market research, business growth strategies, and inclusive marketing services to corporations and brands that want to successfully tap into cultural shifts and diverse market segments to drive business growth. Listed 2 times by Inc. 5000 as one of America's fastest growing independently owned companies. The group includes Cien Plus, the Choice Plus, the Human Dot Plus, and Lili is an independent board director for the global youth retailer Sumis. Did I pronounce that right?
Yes, you did.
Sumis and RCN Television. She also serves as chairwoman with the Friends of the National Museum of the American Latino, investor and operating executive board member for AUA, Private Equity Partners, and advisor to the fintech company Tres. Her impact Her impact work includes serving as a trustee and scholarship provider at the Hispanic Institution, Southwestern Adventist University, mentor to the Stanford University Latino Business Action Network. I did that program. And member of the World Economic Forum, and steering member for the Health Equity Forum hosted at the United Nations. Welcome, Lili.
Thank you so much.
Estuardo Rodriguez is a principal and co-founder at Raven, focused on government affairs. He specializes in direct lobbying on Capitol Hill, the White House, and federal agencies in the areas of financial services, technology, and telecommunications. Celebrated by the Hill and the National Institute for Lobbying and Ethics as a top lobbyist, Estuardo has also cultivated a powerful network of media relationships and serves in the dual role as Raven's counsel and on media and communications. Beginning in 2004, 20 years ago, Estuardo launched an effort to gain congressional and White House authorization to build a Smithsonian museum that would exhibit more than 500 years of contributions and sacrifices of Latinos in the United States. He currently serves as president and CEO of the Friends of the National Museum of the American Latino, a campaign to create a Smithsonian National Museum of the American Latino on the National Mall. Estuardo also uses his influence and leadership on various nonprofits and industry boards. Estuardo is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and also serves on the University of Virginia Sorensen Institute for Political Leadership Advisory Board. Lili and Estuardo both serve on the ALVA Advisory Council. Thank you so much for joining us today, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So just for clarification's sake, so everyone's level set, the Friends of the National Museum of the American Latino is a national 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to ensuring that we can make this museum a reality. And in full disclosure, I was the previous chairman of the group, and I'm now considered the chairman emeritus, mostly because of all the gray hair.
And I had to inherit the big shoes that you left for us on the board, Danny.
Well, and I would follow that up, Danny, since you were doing the little disclosures there, that we are not affiliated with the Smithsonian American Latino Museum in any way.
Absolutely.
Which is always important to highlight.
Very important point.
Yeah.
All right. So we've gone through the bios. So let's start by talking about how you each got involved with this important effort. Estuardo, as the senior among us, why don't you go ahead and start how you got involved 100 years ago?
Yeah. I mean, you already started the dating, so yeah, it's been a 20-year run, which I mean, I know both of you know this well. It really was just an opportunity that came upon me and the team during a CHCI, Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute legislative conference, where we had our madrina, Congresswoman Ileana Ross-Layton, now retired from Congress, and Congressman Javier Becerra, who is also retired from Congress and now the Secretary of Health and Human Services. Both those individuals sharing in the vision of what one day could be an American Latino Museum hosted a conversation where it just piqued my interest and my team's interest. And we decided to, no good deed goes unpunished. We volunteered to help out. And that took us down this road for 20 years, which of course you played such an integral part in that final stage in 2020, which we can talk about more later. But really it was an opportunity to explore how do we talk about our U.S. Latino history and what role does our National Mall have in all the iconic museums? Because for me, growing up in Washington, I was born in the district, going to the National Mall was like a weekend activity. We just went through different museums. Never once did it occur to me that my story was missing. You just go through these museums and are just amazed by all the storytelling. Well, thankfully, someone, specifically Raul Izaguirre, back in 1994, decided that there was something missing and it was important to highlight that. And I was just lucky enough to be there to pick up the baton, and I've been doing it ever since with amazing people like both of you.
So you started when you were 10 years old, right? Pretty much.
Exactly.
Pretty
Exactly.
much.
Pretty much.
Don't do the math because
Amazing.
nobody will believe it.
Exactly. The time flies, and when you're having fun, as they say, and we've been having a great time, and hopefully now nearing the end, right? The last page here. Closes.
That's right. That's right.
How about you, Lili? How'd you get involved?
Well, I have both of you to thank for that beautiful journey that started. I was trying to look up the date. My goodness, I should know this, but it feels like it's now about 6 years since it started. But, you know, in the work that I do, working with big corporations, trying to influence their budgets and their business plans as it relates to addressing the fast-growing, shifting demographics of our country, which Latinos, of course, are driving more than 50% of the growth of all population, it made sense to lean into an agenda like this one. And, you know, you get invited to a lot of events, and I got invited to something that was related to the Friends. And right away, I think Estuardo jokes about this. You said, Danny, this was kind of like chatting amongst amigos. I'm going to go into the amigo kind of side of the introduction of how I ended up on the board. Apparently, I was very bold in asking people for money. So as a businesswoman that unapologetically wants every corporation or every person to really pour in their dollars into our communities, I got the pleasure of attending one of your events when both of you, of course, were at the helm, you as the chair, Danny, Estuardo as the CEO of the organization. And I, in my roundtable, just started volunteering for just asking people for money. Because of course we need to get this great effort funded. And maybe you both were auditioning me for a position on the board when it's like, well, that lady seems quite interesting and very unapologetic about looking for supporters. So long story short, you know, thank you. And thank you both, because I know you were my padrinos in this process for considering my name as a member of the board initially. And fast forward later, when Danny was terming out of his position as chair, which, by the way, he's still on the board as our chair emeritus, then I was given the great opportunity to be voted in as the transitioning chair that took that role from Danny. And here I am now. And gosh, you guys talk about 2 decades, certainly 5 years or more feel like a blink. So I got the benefit of coming into the stretch that felt like the last mile of a marathon. And I think we're still in that last mile, maybe just a few meters, not a full mile to the finish line. But that's how it was. I was at an event, loving the mission, giving my heart without expecting anything in return. And here we are now.
Yeah, I seem to remember.
Back to no good deed goes unpunished.
I know, right?
I seem to remember some of those casual conversations about you coming onto the board. Yeah.
Yeah, you guys recruited me because I just ask people for money.
Money is the life's blood.
¿Qué pasó?
I was telling Danny, I remember that we had barely just met. You asked me all about it. We sat down at dinner, and then in the conversation piece, you stood up and made the pitch for the whole museum.
Oh
To
yeah.
everybody, to the point that I was like, wow, I don't need to do anything here. I just met her and she's doing an amazing job already conveying
Ay, qué
enthusiasm.
lindo.
It was
But
great.
you know what? It makes sense. This, I guess we're back on, let me get myself together here. We're back to recording, right?
Yes.
Let's be, oh, I disconnected myself. Hold on. I disconnected myself. All right. So yeah, it's like, maybe we can pick it up now. It's like you never know who's watching. So everyone, be at your best at all times, straight from the heart, without expecting anything. Something may come about. And all of a sudden, I took the biggest shoes in the house with Danny, transitioning that chairmanship, which I'm enjoying greatly. So here we are.
Well, everyone's doing a great job. For me, I got involved, I think, in 2007, not nearly as long as Estuardo, but that's when I had heard about the bill that was being bandied about to create a commission to study the feasibility of this museum. So I talked to my member of Congress and I said, well, if this passes, can you help get me appointed to this commission? Because I would find it fascinating. So that's how I got involved through the commission those days. And we'll go through the history in a few minutes. But before we go through the timeline of events, why don't we just take a moment to talk about, from your perspective, why is this museum important? Why is it vital?
Sure. I don't know. Lili, do you want to go first?
Sure. I think you kind of said it in the introduction, Danny, and it's in Eduardo's bio. There is over 500 years of contributions of American Latinos to every aspect of American society, history, and in fact, there's so many fun facts, many that I've learned through this process, and from you, Danny, that we think history started in with Plymouth Rock and the arrival of the Pilgrims and all that stuff, when St. Augustine, Florida really is the oldest city settlement, in the United States, and that is a Spanish city. So we were speaking Spanish here as the first foreign language before English. And a lot of people don't know that, and our kids need to know that complete telling of American history. And that matters a lot, because as we continue to grow into a fast approaching majority minority nation, just with the sheer numbers of shifting demographics and birth rates and what we're seeing, roughly by the year 2040, we will be at that new status of a new America. And forget about ethnicity and labels. We're American, and we love our country, and we want to be able to understand where we come from, what has contributed to the ethos and the essence of who we are. And you cannot tell American history without it including Latino history. Because I just told you that fun fact about St. Augustine, and there's many more, by the way. I know, Danny, you have a lot of fun facts with some of members of our community that have been crucial in as early as the Revolutionary War, and fast forward to today. So anyhow, I think it's important, because as Americans and as the world, we need to continue to protect and preserve the stories that shape history, to honor and elevate that, and also for that new generation of majority minority Americans to see themselves in the history books and in the hallways of iconic institutions like the ones we have in Washington, D.C., that the world needs to feel, embrace, and continue to be proud of.
Yeah. I think Lili said it all. Really, I will just underscore: we don't know what we don't know, and the identity piece of the conversations that we have as a community, not just as a Latino community, but as an American society. When we point a finger at each other with assumptions or presumptions of what we believe that the other is about, it creates the divisions, even within our Latino community. Not knowing what we don't know is part of the problem. When you go through a museum and you spend the time going through a museum, whether it's an elementary school or if it's a college age group, there's always going to be a moment where you just look and stare and go, wow, I had no idea, right? And that spark is what ultimately leads to change, because understanding more allows you to step back and fully grasp. I was just talking to somebody the other day, and so many times we fill in the gaps with our own story of what we believe the other person to be about, because we don't know. We do that with politics. We do that with entertainment. We do that with celebrity, right? We don't know them, but we're like, oh, you know what? Here's what I think they're about. Here's what and that's part of also the chisme culture. But it's the truth. It's you fill in gaps. And the museum allows us the opportunity to push pause on that, correct the narrative, whether it's malintention or not, or good intention or not, correct the narrative with actual facts. One of the things, Danny, you and I talked about for many years as we navigated the halls of Congress on the Republican side and the Democratic side, is that the museum was not a civil rights issue. Right. The museum was not a left issue or right issue. It was an American issue. And you rightly underscored the patriotic role of 500 years of history. That's part of correcting the narrative. That's part of filling the gaps with fact, replacing the fill in the blank thing that many people do when they don't understand a specific community, or when we don't even understand each other. Because as you know, even within our own community, we paint each other in a certain way because we don't know. So we make assumptions. So this to me is more than 4 walls and a ceiling. It's about course correcting so that we can better be inclusive and celebrate what makes us truly strong.
I totally agree. And you talked about narrative. And I think that's super important. The other thing that I think is important is as you step back a little bit, I've always said that you can't know where you're going unless you have a better sense of where you came from. You can't shape your future unless you understand your past. And I think it's really important that we make sure that we fill in not only the gaps, but also the data points and the information. Latinos have been vital to the building, shaping, and defending of this nation from the very beginning. I talk about our military contributions quite a bit. You've mentioned it lately, from Spanish General Galvez and over 10,000 Spanish troops that came from the New World, from the Caribbean, from Central America, to help stem the advance of the British from the South, allowing General Washington to win the War of Independence. To the first full admiral in the United States Navy, David Farragut, during the Civil War, who said, "Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead." To the 200,000 Latino troops in World War I, to the 500,000 in World War II, to the 65th Infantry Regiment during Korea, the Borinqueneers of Puerto Rico setting the gold standard for the bravery of a combat unit, to the thousands of Hispanic surnames on the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Wall, and the young Latinas and Latinos who served and sacrificed on our behalf in the battlefields of Afghanistan and Iraq, or the 60-plus Hispanic Medal of Honor recipients, or the current 25% of the United States Marine Corps active duty. Latinos take a backseat to no one in the defense of liberty. All these stories need to be told, and they need to be embraced, and we need to be proud of them. So this museum is going to be super important because, and I think it's important that we share the fulsome story, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
That's right.
Because it really is part of our identity as a nation. So kudos to you guys for continuing the effort, and we'll get it done, I know. But it's probably important for us to go through a little bit for our audience who doesn't know about the museum effort, to go through the timeline, starting, I guess, 1994. Estuardo, do you want to take a crack at that? And then maybe Lili fill us in on some of the details as well.
Great. So, as I hinted at in the beginning of my remarks, Raúl Izaguirre, central to the creation of National Council of La Raza, now Unidos US, he was the one who organized a group of Latina leaders to question the Smithsonian about why there was nothing within the Smithsonian that truly highlighted the diversity, not just even Latino history, but just broader diversity. The Smithsonian took it upon themselves to conduct their own research and presented that report, Willful Neglect, that highlighted the lack of diversity across the Smithsonian. And through that report, several recommendations came from it. Again, 1994, where they first suggested the possibility of creating a Latino center to conduct studies around exhibits, the recommendation to create an actual museum at some point, and then a number of other recommendations focused on hiring and diversity within the Smithsonian itself. So 10 recommendations in total. It was sad that 10 years later, you had barely begun to chip away at those actions that were suggested or recommended. And finally, in 2004, 10 years later, is when Congressman Becerra and Indiana Ross Leighton introduced that bill. And even with that, 2004, to not even get the first piece of legislation through until 2008 to create the commission where Danny Vargas steps in with so many of our allies and friends to conduct that important study around the support that a future Latino museum would have. And then you're moving on from there to present that commission report, which you should obviously talk more about since you were on the commission. But this is a longer process. When people talk about creating a museum, it is not something that, oh, let's just pass a bill. It took the African American Museum almost 80 years, 80. They went through 4 different commissions. So going in there eyes wide open, it really wasn't this exciting thing like, oh, we're going to get it done tomorrow. It's like, let's hope we don't end up in a long slog the way the African American Museum had. But we had amazing support, bipartisan from the very start, and that's really the energy we've been trying to keep up.
And then the 501c3 was founded when?
So the 501c3 actually that came along at the same time when the 2008 National Museum of American Latino Commission bill went through. That's when the Friends organization went from being an informal advisory group made up of some 20, 40 Latino organizations to an official 501c3 with a board structure and fundraising operation. Because for those 4 years, we didn't know what was going to happen. We had no idea if this was going to be something we just pushed through within 2 Congresses, and then realized quickly in 2008 we needed to formalize all of the work so that we could see the marathon to the end, right? And it's been an exciting time ever since. But hopefully, with everyone's help, we'll get this stuff.
So I'll talk about the commission just briefly. I was fortunate enough to be appointed to the commission by Congress, but we came together for the first time in September of 2009. And it was 23 of us from very different backgrounds, people like Eva Longoria, Emilio Estefan, et cetera, Republicans, Democrats, and the business people, arts people, et cetera. But we came together as a family pretty quickly and traveled around the country getting input from citizens and experts. And we finally came up with our report that we delivered to President Obama in May of 2011. And so the Willful Neglect Report, that was its title. The title we chose for our report was to illuminate the American story for the benefit of everyone, Latinos and non-Latinos, Americans and those visiting our country to get a better sense of who we are as a nation. And we had 3 basic findings. One was a clear and pressing need for the museum. True, it really should be part of the Smithsonian institution because we had an option to make it a very private museum. And 3, it really ought to be on the National Mall, America's backyard. And then in the fall of that year of 2011 was the first time that an authorization bill was introduced in Congress, and that's when I joined the Friends Group board. And then that effort continued to try to get that bill passed, to try to get co-sponsors. We can get into the machinations of how to get a bill passed in Congress, all the sausage making in a little bit. But I didn't become chairman of that 501c3 until December 2016. When it became clear that we needed to diversify the board in terms of political makeup, we created the Chairman's Advisory Council. We built this national coalition of partners, over 100 organizations, to be able to help us. And we got the bill passed in December of 2020. We'll talk about the details in a little bit, but then we handed the baton off to Lili, and Lili, you take it from here.
Yes, I did. I want to underscore something because it's I didn't get to appreciate the power of coalitions and the work that you do, Estuardo, and Raven does on advocating and lobbying. I have been always the corporate type, and yes, I still have to influence and lobby for projects in front of a board or executives, but my goodness, the effort that it takes to get stuff passed and done, and the consensus and the sponsorship for a bill. And let's think about it. It's been multiple iterations of bills and approvals in the 20-year tenure of this project. It is, first of all, a remarkable effort that I, pay homage to all of you that have been there from ground zero, day one. But it also reminds me that the work is never truly, truly done until it's done. And I know there's been questions about, and thanks for the clarification, Eduardo. It's like, but the Friends is not associated with the Smithsonian organization. And in a way, that is the very reason why it needs to exist, because it is an entity parallel to the efforts that allows for that independent voice, that, shaking up of the trees that sometimes you need to do to get people's attention, to engage Republicans and Democrats and community organizations and advocacy groups, so that we can all sing to the same tune and create a sense of urgency. Because otherwise, out of sight, out of mind. So even if a commission is done with its work, even if a bill is drafted by a few sponsors that are there right behind it, without the work of the Friends for advocacy, we couldn't get the milestones passed beyond that one first move and the next step and the next step and the next step. So sure enough, I come in and we got which was very, it was like a birthday gift for Danny. We got the signature for the bill that finally makes all of this effort and all of these assessments and all of these feasibility studies. And it declares that, yes, indeed, we will have a museum because we need it and it's important for American history, period. And we thought we were done. And here we are still in existence. And sometimes we were asked, we're like, what do the Friends do? It's like, well, we're not done until we're done. So even though you may have a bill, that is really where officially the work of the Smithsonian as the entity, the agency, the curator of the work starts. So we may be handing a baton, but we still don't know where the work starts if we don't know where the museum is going to be. So this is where we're at. And people ask over and over all the time, where are we? We need to make sure we have the location, the best location, and the Smithsonian has already recommended a few, and Estuardo can give us details around those. But yes, has to be on the National Mall. And we also need to get back to the powers of being in DC to bless the location as the location. Hence why the work of the Friends continues. And by the way, not to make it more complicated, as maybe those of you listening are trying to track the time. It's like, oh my goodness, it's a lot of pieces. But there's also a women's museum in parallel happening as our effort is undergoing all these milestones. So we're not just talking about making sure we have the right location for our Latino museum, but also for the women's museum, because that gets approved and it's already been deemed as such by the Smithsonian. It's a bundle project. We're twins. It's like we're birthing twins. So that adds another layer of complexity, if I may call it that, because there's even more parties involved and not one but two locations to be vetted and to be approved. So where are we at? Yes, we have a bill. Yay. Yes, the Smithsonian has its efforts and we have a director for all these efforts and a board of trustees and all. That's wonderful. But we cannot start formally fundraising and daydreaming of a location or daydreaming of a render if we don't know where that's going to be. So in layman's terms, that's where we're at, and the work that continues until it's done. So Eduardo can give more technicalities about what it takes, but hey, it has to be bipartisan and it needs to be on the national ball, plain and simple.
Well, Danny, I would just kind of quickly push it in here. I'll follow your lead on it, but I think it's important to highlight that the Smithsonian does have approval for the museum. It just doesn't have approval to build on the National Mall where our history is told, where the 26 million tourists go every year. It does have an executive director in Jorge Samarillo, who's an amazing director for that museum and has spent 3 decades of his life in the world of museum and arts. He's already fundraising. But as we all know, it's hard to fundraise when you can't just point the finger and say that's where it's going to be, right? Yeah. And that's the charge that he has right now, to get this museum going, even if he doesn't have the official location yet, which is truly commendable.
So maybe we take a minute to sort of double click on some of the inside baseball, if you will, to give the audience a little bit of color on how we all got to where we are. So I'll go to 2020 when, after lots and lots of effort, we had worked to try to get as many co-sponsors on the bill as possible. Ileana Ross-Layton had retired. She had been our champion in the House. And when she retired, we needed to find a new champion on the Republican side. And I remember when we went to meet with Will Hurd in his office, who was a Republican congressman from Texas, and who's about 6'5", by the way. I remember when we asked him to be our champion, and he finally, after a long conversation, said yes. And he stood up, and I looked up at him and said, Padre, Fili, Spiritu Santo, you're now our champion on the Republican side. But that began a long effort to get as many Republicans and Democrats as co-sponsors. And the inside baseball pieces, you need to get to 2/3 of the House to be able to do what they call suspension bill. We got to 295 co-sponsors in the House. And in July of 2020, that bill passed unanimously in the House. And we turned our attention to the Senate, where we had worked hard to try to get as many co-sponsors on the Senate side. I remember we had 3 a.m. phone calls with fundraisers for Senator Cruz and things like that. And
yes,
we went to testify in the Senate Rules Committee, thanks to Senator Roy Blunt. And we, in November of 2020, we were able to get the bill on the floor for a unanimous consent vote in the Senate, and it was killed by one U.S. Senator.
Yeah,
we'll say the name, Mike Lee of Utah. So we had to go to Plan B. Plan B was to get it included in an omnibus bill. Well, that took some horse trading. That horse trading included the fact that we needed to not only include language to make sure that the museum would have the political perspectives of both sides, but also keep a portion of the National Mall reserved and restricted from building new museums. That was the only way we were able to get our bill included in the omnibus. And yes, it did pass in the Congress on my birthday, December 21st.
That's
signed
right.
into law by President Trump 6 days later. But that's why we are where we are now, because yes, we have an authorization bill, but that portion of the National Mall that would be ideal for both our museum and the Women's Museum has been reserved and restricted for both. So we've got to remove that restriction now. And that's the challenge. So maybe Estuardo, talk us through how where we are now. How can we get that restriction removed so we can actually move forward?
Well, 2 things. One, I want to go back to Mike Lee for a hot second, just to say kudos to Mike Lee for doing what he did, and that it was a pain in the butt that he did it, but he elevated the visibility and the importance of the museum just by putting his, by blocking it. He created the opportunity and springboard for so many people to become more aware of what was happening, become outraged, right? And it affected not just the Latino Museum, it affected the Women's History Museum too. So it was double the pressure to respond to Mike Lee and say, look, we're gonna push through on this and not let you shut us down. Ultimately, no, we did not want that language that was added, in also very bipartisan fashion. We have to acknowledge. We'll name them as you started naming people. Senator Manchin, Senator Murkowski added that language and that restriction, right? But right now we're looking at that same playbook from 2020, looking at the vehicles that exist before the end of this Congress. As you mentioned, President Trump signed the bill into law, but President Trump had no idea he was signing that bill into law. There were 600 some pieces of legislation in the omnibus. He did not read any one of them that I'm aware of, because most presidents don't. At the end of the year, they want to wrap it up, and so they just sign it if Congress has approved it in both chambers. So absolutely was done in the last year of the Trump administration. Now the work is to make sure that the House and the Senate introduce their bills again to push through that restriction to build on the mall, which they have done already. The House has done theirs, introduced their bill, and the Senate has introduced their bill. They're not identical, so we'll have to wordsmith and have these bills match. But it will be an effort to get the House to pass that bill this year, likely after the elections, because there's not enough time simply to do anything else before the elections, and then get that over to the Senate from the House. Similar effort, push that through, and hopefully we'll have one over by then the staff and the operations of on the Senate that have concerns about building on the mall, which I think we will. I think we're in a very good space. We're in a stronger bipartisan space than we were before.
Yes, exactly. And Danny, also to add, there is precedent. We're not the first to have to kind of convince the right bodies and entities about lifting a restriction, because the African American Museum had to go through a similar effort. And by the way, because I want to put this out there, some people think it's like, whose agenda is it that want to like block this or that? Well, there are, you know, environmental reasons and some big, you know, perspectives about like, let's leave it alone, let's not do anything else. So it's nothing against the Women's and Latino Museum per se. It's more of a broader philosophical and principle of like, the mall is already built as it needs to be, period. Don't put anything else on it. So there's a lot of that I've learned as well through this process of the mastery and need for narrative massaging and messaging, because anything that could appear, sadly, in today's society and rapid, you know, social media reaction of people, anything that may appear as a counter to the museum could be misinterpreted as anti-Latino, and many times is not at all. It's just rules that have been there for many years that nobody ever questioned, or timing of things, or as Eduardo mentioned, sometimes it happens the other way around, that we happen to get things approved by just bundling them into a bigger, you know, grouping of legislation that happens to go through when we need to, and let it run. So anyway, there's a lot of moving pieces, but so we don't get overly complicated what it is, we got the right support. It is beautifully bipartisan, and there is the language that we need to lift the restriction so we can get the location and move forward. So hopefully it becomes a Christmas gift again, Danny, as it happened with you.
That would be awesome. December 21st, get it passed.
That's right.
I would be remiss though if I didn't underline and highlight the fact that we could not have gotten the bill passed. We could not have made the progress that we made without lots and lots and lots of people. You know, the elected officials, the staffers on Capitol Hill, all of the members of the national coalition of partners that I described earlier, the tens of thousands, if not millions of people that supported this effort. You know, we had lots and lots of people engage with us in social media, call the members of Congress, you know, send in emails and letters and so forth. You know, all of that over an extended period of time, over 26 years from the idea to the bill passage, and now beyond that. So this has been such a huge undertaking with so many people to thank. There's not enough time or bandwidth to thank everybody that needs to be thanked, but I'm convinced that there are lots of people that want to be able to help now. So let's take a minute to talk about how people can help now with making sure that we can make this happen in reality.
Yeah, we want to start by pointing where all information is received and reviewed, and that is the internet, American Latino Museum.org. That's where a lot of our information is around the current legislation, how people can sign up and get involved. We will get to the point post-election where we will be calling on the community to weigh in, to reach out to Capitol Hill, let folks know this needs to get done this year. We also have opportunities with broader coalitions by industry, whether it's, you know, the private sector or corporate America sending in their letters, whether it's military and veterans sending in their letter as a sign-on. The opportunity to gather people and build out a huge base of supporters that are focused on their sector of our society is also just very important, so that people on Capitol Hill realize it's not just about this one small Latino community. It's about a universe that has contributed across the 500 years, and the opportunity for them to get engaged in lobbying Congress to have their voice heard. That's what we're going to be focused on right after the elections, to make sure people are ready to go and we get this across the finish line. So AmericanLatinoMuseum.org, and of course all the social media handles that are Latino Museum, at Latino Museum, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.
Yep. And Danny, maybe one more thing. Anybody that is watching that is affiliated with a company or a big corporation, or happens to have power and influence in a corporation, while we may not have the beautiful render to point to the location yet, the fundraising has started. So just bringing that up to the awareness of the executives of corporations, and making sure that they know that this is one of those critical legacy initiatives and capital campaigns to be put on corporations' radars is critical. And maybe you watching may think, oh, yeah, I work for, I don't know, Corporation ABC, and I don't know the CEO. It doesn't matter. You can, I'm sure, try to get to either a chief diversity officer somewhere, a government affairs person somewhere. There's ways, and there's the power of LinkedIn as well. But we do want that corporate support sooner than later, because then when the time comes for fundraising and the appropriations phase of this entire effort, which will be 50-50, paid by the people's monies and by private sector, the more of those corporations that we have already made aware and committed, the better it will be for us to shortcut, God willing, the timeline until we get to break ground.
Yes, yes. And all that, just to go back to the Smithsonian distinction, all of that fundraising, capital campaign wise, we, as you well know, Danny, we turned all of that over to the Smithsonian.
Exactly.
We don't handle capital campaign. So if you are interested, as Lili said, more than happy to connect folks directly with the Smithsonian so they can have that conversation.
Well, I appreciate that. And as both of you know, as members of the ALVA Advisory Council, you know that our mission is to help Latino veterans thrive and recognize their indispensable contributions. We do our best to make sure that we're sharing the stories of Latino contributions to the military. But this National Museum on the National Mall, as well as its virtual presence, so it won't just be four walls in a building in Washington, D.C. It will be expansive throughout the internet and throughout the rest of the world, will serve an important role in making sure that we can tell the stories of Latino contributions to our national defense and security throughout the last 248 years and into the future. So that's from a veteran perspective. That's why it's important to us to make sure that we can support this effort and make sure that it's a reality, so that we can not only walk in the doors of this building one day, but also see those stories spread virtually throughout the rest of the world.
Absolutely. I can't wait, because every time I talk to you, Danny, I learn a new fun fact about military. By the way, sorry, shameless plug to something I learned, because you never stop learning. We went to Spain with the friends, with a friends delegation, and I learned a really fun fact, Danny. You got to add it into your bag of stories, that I had no idea that to help our own Revolutionary War here and General Washington and everybody else fighting for our freedom here, the criollos, so many of our own ancestors, from Peru, Colombia, Mexico, the wealthy Spaniards that were now settled in the Americas, were sending money and also smuggling the weapons in cod crates to help North America in their fight. I found that fascinating. So there you go. We were the angel investors to some extent of that, of the many wars that were fought. I had no idea. Maybe you knew that already, but it was just so fun to learn all these little things that I want our kids to know, our American kids to know, that there are those Hispanic American contributions from way back from the very beginning that allowed us to fight for our own freedom from day one. So that was kind of a fun fact.
Time, talent, and treasure. And as we know, we are a diverse community, and in our veins is the blood of caudillos and caciques and guerreros, and that was instrumental in our fight and our continued service to our nation. All right, let's wrap it up one more time. Where can people go to find out more and help?
AmericanLatinoMuseum.org. Please join us there and get involved so we can get this over the finish line.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lili and Estuardo. We really appreciate your time. Lili Valletta, Estuardo Rodriguez, thank you so much, and we're going to make this thing a reality.
Gracias, Danny.
And thank you all so much for joining us. On behalf of the American Latino Veterans Association, I appreciate you joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the content. Please join us for future webinars and podcasts. And please keep an eye out for information on our upcoming events by visiting our website, alvavets.org. Thank you once again to Lili and Estuardo for being our guest today. Thank you again to our sponsors for these podcasts and webinars, JPMorganChase, PMI, Wells Fargo, AT&T, T-Mobile, and Accenture. Thank you again for joining us. And as always, be safe, aim high, and thrive. We'll see you next time. Thanks again.
Thank you.